Is your reality real? Or was your reality constructed by a colonial entity? These are the questions that you should be asking, ladies and gentlemen, when you retrospect. But if you haven't, well, this fine young lady tries to answer that for us.
What does it mean to name the world? Hi, my name is Mumbi, disobediently African, and in this essay, I want to talk about the coloniality of knowledge, also epistemic violence, knowledge apartheid, Sylvia Tamale's big lie, Ngugi wa Thiong'o's cultural bomb, existential epistemology, and more. So just wait there. To try and give this essay a little bit of structure, which I can't promise, I'm going to start by just making three statements that will anchor the rest of this essay. The first statement that I will make is that one, knowledge doesn't emerge in a vacuum. And here I'm drawing from Foucault, who said that knowledge production is extremely political, and not just the content of knowledge itself, but also who gets to define what even is legitimate knowledge. And here I'm going.
That's an interesting thought. I've never thought of it that way. I've never thought that, like, who defines knowledge, or like what is actually knowledge in to some regard. That's a very good existential question that I'm gonna ponder on that. When I watch these kinds of videos that actually educate, sometimes I do tell my own POVs, but when I like sit back and think to myself, like, I could have said more, and that's dope, fam. That's honestly dope, and you should actually write that down. Not gonna lie, fam.
To quote from Veli Mitova, who says that we live in an epistemically colonial world. Although the global north physically left us, Although the global north physically left as colonial master long ago, it still gets to tell the global south what counts as genuine knowledge, rational thought, and real science. So I'll get back to that in a minute.
But that's true, though. I mean, we're gonna let her cook, but that's very, very true, fam. Even when it comes to things to do with modesty, when it comes to how we should be dressing, go to class, all this kind of stuff, you know. Oh, that's deep, fam. That's deep. Like, again, even when it comes to, like, if we, I know English is now a global language, but or if you study like, or speak in English, all this kind of stuff, it makes you seem more intelligent compared to the one a person who is speaking in their mother tongue or their vernacular. We are not raising critical thinkers in that regard, but you know what I mean. So, I mean, I did a video about that like a while back, but I'm just trying to put a point across. Oof, that's dope.
The second statement that I want to make here is that colonization was not only physically violent, but drawing from Ngugi wa Thiong'o and Frantz Fanon, colonization was also mentally and spiritually violent. Fanon said that colonization also affected the psyche of the colonized. And this was the epistemic colonization. And this is the work that this is what decoloniality is interested in. So, just to say the difference between decolonization and decoloniality, we know is the historical process where colonized peoples gained political independence, whereas decoloniality is the continued work that deals with the remnants of colonization. So just like in the quotes that we read, just because the global north left as colonial master physically, there are still remnants of colonization. So
That's true, dog. That's true. Even, bro, I watched this video on TikTok where this guy was talking about. I know politics is something that has always been, but like they're talking about, like, let's take for example black on black hate. Why is that? Why should that be the case, ladies and gentlemen? You know what I mean? Something divide and conquer was used, by our colonial masters to wage wars against each other. And that's how one community was, they gave another community the guns, all this kind of stuff, if they hated each other, and then they went on to do a madness against the other community, all that kind of stuff. And then, that thing, that thing has always been there, when it comes to tribalism, all that kind of stuff. It has always been there, even when it comes to this nuance in South Africa, when it comes to xenophobia, all this kind of stuff.
Like by being here, like what we're doing here, this is decoloniality. We're trying to deal with the remnants of colonization. The third statement that I will make is just, what can one do with all this information? And so here I'm drawing from Walter Mignolo's epistemic disobedience. One can choose to be disobedient, to think outside of the colonial frame or outside what Mudimbe called the colonial library. And for me, that just looks like being inquisitive, just asking why is something the way it is and who does that benefit. So by even like these essays, I feel like this is a way of being disobedient. So by being here, we're also being epistemically disobedient. We're trying to question knowledge itself and knowledge production. Okay, so now I'm gonna get into the essay itself. That was just a small introduction. Um, and I'm going to pick up from the second statement that so colonization was not just about physical subjugation. Colonization didn't just dispossess us of land and material things, but it also was mental and spiritual. Frantz Fanon puts it like this. He said that colonization took away the colonized's ability to name the world. So, on two sides, one from a language perspective, to literally name the world, but also naming the world here means defining reality. If you name something, it means you get to decide what it is, and you get to decide how it works, you get to decide if it's important, and so on. And because colonized peoples were denied the opportunity to contribute to their own epistemologies or to contribute to knowledge, it also meant that how they experienced reality was from somebody else naming the world or from someone else's epistemologies.
From what I'm getting, if I'm understanding this correctly, ladies and gentlemen, reality, all this kind of stuff. Let's take, for example, especially our forefathers or like my grandfather and then my father, all this kind of stuff. When it comes to reality, what like reality in the sense that maybe let's in this instance, if this certain type of people still speak in their mother tongue or in their vernacular, they're not deemed as cool, or they're not accepted by a certain community who already knows the language of the colonial masters. And so one group is disregarded, and then this other group they are now like favored, so to say. You know what I mean? Or with religion, I've been seeing people like trying to deconstruct like how the church or like Jesus or the Bible was used to psychologically frame, also culturally frame, like many Africans to say, oh, this is bad, oh, witchcraft is bad, all this kind of stuff is bad. And then if you actually think of it, that is actually hypocritical, because again, in the West, you get to see that there's this Harry Potters, all this kind of stuff, these things that are actually, I guess, physics, I don't know, astrophysics, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, but it's basically the same thing, witchcraft, but we're made to see, oh, this is bad and this is good, this kind of stuff, and it's a bit mad, fam.
So, for example, we can think of it like this, like, you know how a lot of knowledge that we think or we consider to be universal is actually mostly just Western, whereas our knowledge is often considered or defined as local, traditional, indigenous. You can think of it as like medicinal practices, religion, and so on and so forth. Um, and so Sylvia Tamale, she has an essay called A is for Africa, where she defines this as the big lie. So basically, this view that we experience reality is not objective, basically, and that is the big lie. And Sylvia Tamale, in her essay, she says that the world is living one big lie, that there is only one correct way to be human, which mandates conformity to the Western way of thinking, being, and doing. And you
You do not think like a white man, or we do not think look at how they've created this. You would not think like them, or this and that. Those are very bad things, not gonna lie. If you tell that, oh, think like a white man, or think like this, or dress like this. Eh, you see how the Americans do it? I know, I see it, fam. I see it, ladies and gentlemen. I see it, fam. Oh, we don't eat with your hands, you eat with our forks. I mean, you can, you know what I mean? Oh, shout out to you, girl. Honestly, shout out to you, girl. Go and check her out after this video.
Can see this with, for example, how we measure or relate to time, because time is actually colonized. Theories of development, formal education, like these are all spheres, and she gives a list of sites where epistemic violence is still being perpetuated to this day. And she just like gives a big picture of how, if the world is named for you, then it means the content of knowledge that is found in those spheres comes from somebody else's epistemology. um Gertrude Spivak, she has an essay, Can the Subaltern Speak? Where she called this epistemic violence, denying marginalized people the ability to contribute to knowledge. And in her essay, she asks, Can the subaltern speak? And we know the answer is leans more towards no, or that even when the subaltern does speak, our voices are often either appropriated or marginalized. And so, if we're thinking of it in this way, that like a lot of the knowledge that we consider to be universal is actually Western, but knowledge that comes from marginalized peoples is never really considered as like universal. There is a term for this, which is epistemological apartheid. And according to Du Bois, epistemological apartheid is the process of devaluation, marginalization, and limiting of the epistemologies, cultural resources, and ways of knowing of those from racially minoritized backgrounds.
We have to accept, and I'll be one of the first. We have all said at one point in our lives, if you're that is your, from Africa, oh, my culture is not that cool, or like, I don't believe in this. Let me not follow the white man's narrative. You know what I mean? You know what? I'm gonna challenge myself. First, it needs resources. So to say what, like, from what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna try and learn like my language like properly. Honestly, fam, that is like one of the first things that I have to do. Like, I'm not gonna let it die. I'm not gonna let it die, fam. Because English is the vernacular of another man, fam. I'm talking about my vernacular. I'm gonna learn it. And I'm gonna also learn about like my cultures more and be more intertwined with my culture and know yo wagwan. Of course, there's the bad A's and bad C's, but there's also the good, many goods, and I'm gonna go with the many goods. You know what I mean? Yeah, fam. Yeah, fam.
So, of course, if your knowledge is not considered universal, if it is marginalized, so it means that you get to know the world from somebody else's view, and that is the coloniality of knowledge. But not only do you learn about the world or get to see the world through someone else's lens, which is what Fanon called like which is what Fanon described as colonized people being denied the ability to name the world. So you get to experience reality through somebody else's gaze. It not only affects how you see the world, but it also affects how you see yourself, because you and your own stories and your own histories are defined from somebody else's epistemology.
That's why you have internalized racism, ladies and gentlemen. That's why you have tribalism. That's why we vote based on tribes, ladies and gentlemen. That's why we disregard one. Come on, bro. Come on, bro. She's cooking, fam. She's honestly cooking.
So not only are we learning about the world through somebody else's lens, we're also learning about ourselves through somebody else's lens. And I read a quote from a paper by Ipadiola, where she calls this existential epistemology. And she says existential epistemology is denying agency to an oppressed group and making them view and define their own existence through a lens provided by the oppressor. So I thought like this is super interesting because it means then that we're not the decolonization of knowledge and knowledge production then doesn't just means we're decolonizing who gets to define the world, but also who gets to define us. And I thought that that's really important. But I think those are just the highlights of what I wanted to talk about. Oh, okay, no, I'm not done. So, okay, so I want to give an example of what of an area of the coloniality of knowledge. And the example I want to give here is through language. So I want to give an example using language. So we said that when Fanon said that one thing colonization did is it took away the colonized ability to name the world. I also mentioned that this can also be from a language perspective. And here I want to use Ngugi wa Thiong'o because Ngugi wa Thiong'o, of course, said that colonization wasn't just about physical subjugation; it was also about mental subjugation. And for Ngugi wa Thiong'o, one of the vehicles of this mental subjugation of colonization was through language, through the imposition of colonial languages, English, French, Portuguese, as the languages of politics, of business. Language also affects how colonized people see themselves and the world. And for Ngugi, the answer for him was in the I might be wrong, but in the late 70s or 80s, Ngugi wa Thiong'o radically stopped writing in English and went back to writing in his mother tongue, Gikuyu and Kiswahili. Because to him, he believed that it didn't make sense for African writers to continue writing in colonial languages because they couldn't carry the weight of the African experience or an African experience. In the next video, I'll talk about, or in the next essay, I'll talk about what the African means, like what is an African experience. But we'll save that for the next essay.
So that it will make sense when she was talking about the language, all that kind of stuff. That's why you get to see when it also comes to accents, all that kind of stuff. We tend to appeal to the global, audience, or so to say to the Western audience. That used to be me. Not gonna lie to you, fam. Me now, fam. Like if my vernacular or whatever just chips in a little bit, I'm like, hey, yo, cool, fam. Back then I used to cut them out when I used to do my aces, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, I'm gonna cherish my own Ogona life. That is me. That is my African experience. That is me. That is my beauty. That is my heritage. That is my glory. You know what I mean? I'm gonna embrace it, ladies and gentlemen.
And so for Ngugi wa Thiong'o, of course, there was the debate between Ngugi wa Thiong'o and Chinua Achebe of whether you can Africanize colonial languages, but we'll also get to that in another essay. But I just want to read a quote from Ngugi wa Thiong'o, and here I'm reading from his book Decolonizing the Mind. And he said that, in my view, language was the most important vehicle through which that power fascinated and held the soul prisoner. The bullet was the means of physical subjugation, language was the means of spiritual subjugation. So for Ngugi wa Thiong'o, it meant that the imposition of colonial languages amounted to the devaluing of African languages, and we know how intrinsically, like, tied in together language and culture are. So the devaluation of African languages was also the devaluation of African cultures. And so for Ngugi wa Thiong'o, radically, he said we must reclaim our own languages, we must tell our own stories in our own languages. And you know me, I'm where the radicals are. But we talk about the debate between him and Chinua Achebe on this topic in another essay. So I think Ngugi wa Thiong'o here is a very good example of epistemic disobedience, of a refusal to only think within the colonial frame. You don't have to just tell your stories in colonial languages. You would tell your stories in your own languages, and if they want to learn or hear.
I was also thinking about when it comes to music, and I was thinking to an interview, if you guys know Diamond Platnumz, and there's this song that he sang with Jason Derulo, he did the numbers, and apparently the record label that he was in, the heads, they were like, yo, you should sing this song in music. I was like, nah. He flipped all of that. He said, not, I'm gonna do it in my own thing. He did it in Swahili, he did numbers, and he cooked, fam. You know what I mean? Look at Nigeria, ladies and gentlemen. As much as whatever is going on there, like, they really value their own in their culture, all that kind of stuff. I mean, I know maybe they may not be doing it maybe knowingly, but if they're those who actually know it, they're like, you know what, our culture is being propelled into the entire world. That's why when you go to Nigeria, I mean, if you go to the Western world, you get to see, yo, they actually acknowledge, yo, there's the Yoruba, there's the Igbo, all this kind of stuff that actually doing a number, in the economy, and not only that, but around the world, and that is actually so dope. So, a long time ago, I was like, yo, why Kenyan this, Kenyan that? I mean, I don't understand you want to appeal to the global audience when it comes to this and this, but I have seen that them Koreans braves, they do that thing in Korean farm and it's cooking farm. So why not us? You know what I mean? Or like them Asian brothers, they do their thing in their own, vernacular, all that kind of stuff, and it is cooking. So why not us? You know what I mean?
About it, they will learn your language the same way that we learned their language. And so this is epistemic disobedience from the Walter Mignolos. But for me, I call it being disobediently African. And I think that's such a good example. But also another example of just being epistemically disobedient is just being inquisitive, just questioning. And I mentioned this in the beginning of the video. Why is something the way it is, and who does that benefit? And you can apply this to so many things: theories of development, our relationship to time, the food we eat, the clothes we wear, and like so on and so forth. And that is something that you can do with this information, regardless of where you are or what you do. I'm back again here just to read something, just back on the aspect of language being one of the sites of the coloniality of knowledge. And it's from this paper by Ipadiola, where she says, talking about the dominant role which language played, the languages of the colonizers were made the only officially recognized languages of business, education, and entertainment in many of the colonies. In other words, languages were taught to be hierarchical, with the languages of the colonizers at the top, while those of the colonized were commonly referred to as vernaculars and so were outlawed in important conversations. This initially forced Africans to learn in silence until they became minimally proficient in the newly adopted languages. Learning in silence, however, means accepting with a sense of awe and wonder the superiority of the native speakers of the languages. So, again, this just ties in to what I was talking about, of what Ngugi wa Thiong'o said, that the imposition of colonial languages amounted to the devaluation of African languages and in turn African cultures. And that is one side of the coloniality of knowledge.
Okay, well, shout out to her, fam. Shout out to her, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, she's cooked, fam. There's nothing honestly to dispute, and it's about, again, the learning process. It's about like just questioning, man, and I like questioning. The past few months or whatever years, all that kind of stuff, I've just been in that state, we're going this and that, all that kind of stuff, and there's a lot to learn, there's a lot to unpack, all this kind of stuff, and it's just a slow process, and to actually mind our own, to accept our own, because it seems like the current world, the current many Africans, they just want to be accepted by the West, and I don't feel that should be the case. I feel like we have our own thing, and it's just a matter of fact if we Africans can actually come together and actually create this big thing, ladies and gentlemen, because I feel like we are so united yet still not united as well. Forgive me for lack of better words, because man, we can do greatness, we can be the best, fam. That's why I personally, even when it also comes to content, you get to see, this kind of content, I'm like, nah, bruv, let me do my thing, fam. There are big creators from this continent that are doing dope stuff. Why should I not do the same and add my flair, my juice, all that kind of stuff? You know what I mean? But again, it's up to you. It's about you accepting the fact, the reality. If you want to be in that bubble, that is up to you. And yo, if it's working for you, I guess kudos. Another disclaimer, that does not mean that you cannot like learn perspectives from the entire world. For personally, for me, I would like to learn more languages. I can speak 3 4 languages, but I want to add more into my vocabulary, like Spanish, like learn it properly, Italian and other languages also in Africa, that kind of stuff. So I would implore you just to do your due diligence if you want to, and yo, just accept that you are dope, fam, and you have dope stuff. Not to say that everything that comes out of our culture is dope. There's some things that are like, I don't know about this, fam, but we can always take in the good, because we are moral creatures who can know what is right and wrong. And with that said, I'll see you guys in the next one. Go check her out. Please do like, comment, subscribe, all that kind of stuff if you want. It's like if you think that what I've spewed or what she has talked about is wrong. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Cheers.